key Indigenous leaders have met with the Prime Minister and the Opposition Leader.
The effort to change the nation's constitution reaches its most crucial moment.
What we now need to do is to end that echoing silence in our constitution.
We say no!
The Coalition's journey towards a position on constitutional recognition of Indigenous Australians has taken many twists and turns since Tony Abbott pushed for a referendum on the issue in 2014. More recently, after Indigenous people had called for a constitutionally enshrined voice to Parliament as the embodiment of recognition, the Morrison government adopted a plan which emphasised local and regional representative bodies rather than a national one, and legislative rather than constitutional change.
But I just want to give sufficient time for the voice to be considered. Now, constitutional recognition is a different issue.
Respectfully, purposefully, we are seeking to secure support for the question and the associated provisions in time for a successful referendum in this term of Parliament.
But since May last year, the Coalition has been responding to an agenda and a proposal for constitutional change set by a new government, not dictating terms itself.
Do you support Anthony Albanese's proposal that he outlined here today?
Well, I think this has been a positive step today. I think the next step has to be to explain to Australians how the voice will actually work.
The party's position has been constantly evolving.
It's obvious that the Prime Minister has made a political decision based on the advice of his strategists not to provide the detail to the Australian public. And by doing that, I really think he's treating people like mugs.
Who's going to be chosen? How will they be chosen? What powers and functions will the body have? We need to see the Solicitor General's advice.
From a general call for more details to challenging the idea that Indigenous people could consult with executive government. That is, both ministers and the public service, not just the Parliament.
Will the Reserve Bank need to consult with the voice before making a decision on interest rates?
The last time I looked, the Reserve Bank of Australia was independent.
We will form a decision in due course about whether we support the voice or oppose it.
Today, that decision became clear, just days after the legislation containing the government's proposed form of words was introduced to Parliament last Thursday. The opposition is also downplaying the need to wait for a parliamentary committee to consider that form of words.
The Liberal Party resolved today to say yes to constitutional recognition for Indigenous Australians, yes to a local and regional body so that we can get practical outcomes for Indigenous people on the ground. But there was a resounding no to the Prime Minister's Canberra voice. I don't believe this is in our country's best interest. The Liberal Party's proposition here today in opposing the Prime Minister's Canberra voice, we're actually uniting the country.
So the Liberal Party is reverting to the position it had in government. That is, some still vague commitment to recognition in the Constitution, to keep any details about the nature of the voice out of the Constitution and to be purely the subject of legislation in the Parliament, and to only promote local and regional voice bodies in the short term, and to actively campaign against the government's referendum proposal. A commitment to a no vote is binding on the Coalition front bench, but not on the rest of the parliamentary party. One backbencher who plans to defy the party line made it clear she believed this would be at a cost.
We talk a big game about people having the freedom to express their views and the freedom to cross the floor. In practice, it is 100% not without consequence.
In response to the Coalition's suggestion that the voice proposal does not allow for local and regional bodies, both the government and constitutional experts pointed out that, in fact, local and regional voices were a design feature of the model formally endorsed by Federal Cabinet last month.
I want to say loud and clear, the Labor government supports regional voices. Regional voices are already being rolled out in places like South Australia and Victoria, where there has been much progress. The voice will make sure that voices in remote and regional communities are heard. And it's simply misleading for Mr. Dutton to suggest anything otherwise.
Well, I've sat through an awful lot of meetings on this, so the intention behind it always was that there would be information from the ground feeding up into the voice, so the voice is then able to convey that to Parliament and the executive government.
Constitutional lawyer Anne Toomey, who has been involved in many iterations of the debate about both recognition and the voice, also argues that Mr Dutton's counter-proposal doesn't make sense.
The problem is, if you're creating federal, local and regional voices, they're not going to have any power to affect state and local laws at all. Their only role is to be able to somehow advise the Commonwealth executive government. But if you're doing that at a local and regional level without any kind of national voice on top, then either you've got no way of communicating through to the executive government and to Parliament, or you'll have dozens and dozens of dozens of little local bodies all individually communicating with different parts of the executive all over the shop. And so it would be completely and utterly unworkable.
One thing that wasn't mentioned today, but which was raised by the Coalition's Indigenous Affairs spokesman Julian Lisa on Monday, is that the Coalition doesn't even accept the proposed wording the government has put forward on recognition of Indigenous people in the Constitution.
What rights, privileges and obligations are implied by being recognised as First Peoples, and what does that term imply at law?
We had Indigenous people themselves saying how they wanted to be recognised, and how does it make any sense for there to be recognition in the Constitution of people in a way that they themselves don't accept is proper recognition of them?
I hope Mr Dutton doesn't repeat his mistakes of the past. We believe that we have arrived at the right questions and the right amendments, and at the end of the day, this is not a political plaything. This is a decision that the Australian people will make, and I have faith in the Australian people.